when every British street had a Cortina, a Capri, or something leaking oil on the drive? Let's talk about the cars that made the 70s and then disappeared. Number 1. The Ford Cortina. You didn't need to look far in the 70s to find a Cortina. They were everywhere. Outside schools, lining terrace streets, filling company car parks. You could tell the trim level just by the badges on the boot. L, XL, Gear, all proudly stuck on like medals. It was never glamorous, but it always felt dependable. You'd hear that familiar door thud, see the slightly sagging suspension, and know exactly what kind of family owned it. Most had a faint smell of petrol and warm vinyl, the sort that stuck to your clothes after a long drive. People trusted it. It started most mornings, handled long drives without complaint, and looked tidy enough to wash on a Sunday. The kind of car that carried kids, shopping, and whole families on summer holidays to Devon without much fuss. Over time, they vanished. Rust, neglect, and progress saw to that. But mention the Cortina now, and people still smile, not because it was exciting, but because it was familiar. It anchored a decade when British motoring felt simple and honest, before things started to get complicated. Number 2. The Ford Capri. If the Cortina was the family car, the Capri was the dream parked 2 streets over. It had presence, long bonnet, sloped roofline, that unmistakable stance that made every kid point and stare. Even standing still, it looked fast. Owning one meant something. It wasn't about practicality or comfort, it was about attitude. The Capri was for people who wanted to feel like they were in a film, even if they were only driving to Tesco. Ford called it the car you always promised yourself, and somehow that tagline stuck. You didn't need to be rich, just determined enough to get the finance. You could hear one coming before you saw it, the burble of a 3-litre Essex V6 echoing through narrow streets. Boys raced them between roundabouts, dads polished them on Sunday mornings, and half the country dreamed of being Terry McCann from Minder. Today, spotting a Capri feels a bit like seeing an old rock star, slightly worn, a bit temperamental, but still cooler than anything around it. It belonged to an era when driving had swagger, and Ford knew exactly how to bottle it. Number 3. The Austin Allegro. The Allegro was supposed to be British Leyland's big step forward, modern, rounded, something to pull the company out of the mess it was sliding into. Instead, it became the punchline of a decade. Everyone remembers the stories, the square steering wheel, the dodgy build quality, the rust that seemed to start before you even left the dealership. But the thing is, people did buy them, thousands of them. It was the kind of car families ended up with, not because they wanted it, but because it was available and vaguely affordable. You'd see them in beige, in brown, in that faint green that looked tired even when it was new. Owners joked about them, yet still defended them. The way you defend a pet, that's a bit odd, but yours all the same. When it worked, it was fine. When it didn't, you swore, fixed it, and carried on. That was British motoring in the 70s, a mix of hope, compromise, and stubborn pride. Looking back, the Allegro never stood a chance. Wrong time, wrong design, wrong company behind it. But there's something endearing about how unglamorous it was. A car that tried so hard to be modern, it accidentally became timeless for all the wrong reasons. Number 4. The Hillman Avenger. The Avenger always felt like the underdog. It didn't shout for attention, didn't pretend to be flashy, but it had grit. Chrysler's answer to Ford and Volkswagen's family cars, built by Roots in Coventry. It was the sort of car people bought when they didn't want to follow the crowd. It had that boxy, dependable look, sharp edges, simple lines, a bit of chrome to make it feel grown up. It wasn't perfect, but it handled British roads better than most. Solid steering, easy to fix, and a bit quicker than you'd expect if you put your foot down. What gave it character was how quietly capable it was. The Avenger wasn't a showpiece. It was the car that got you to work in the week and down to the seaside on Saturday. Mechanics liked it, families trusted it, and even though it never quite reached cult status, it earned real respect. By the time it disappeared in the early 80s, it had been overshadowed by newer names. But there's a quiet fondness for it now, the kind reserved for things that were unassuming but dependable. A car that never tried to be cool, and somehow ended up being exactly that. Number 5. The Vauxhall Viva. The Viva was everywhere for a while. You couldn't walk through a car park in the 70s without spotting at least 3 of them, each in a different shade of beige or mustard yellow. It was the working person's car, cheap to buy, easy to keep running, and just modern enough to feel like you were doing all right. It started off simple, then grew up through its lifespan. The later HC models had sharper lines, bigger engines, and even a hint of sportiness if you went for the Magnum or Finrenza versions. Those cars had attitude, the kind that came from Vauxhall trying to show it could do more than just sensible. The Viva didn't try to outshine its rivals, but it had a certain honesty that stuck with people. It was a car you could fix on your driveway with a few spanners and some tea. For many, it was their first taste of independence, the car they learnt to drive in, went on holidays in, maybe even had their first breakdown in, mechanical or otherwise. By the time the Astra arrived, the Viva felt old-fashioned, but for a lot of people, it's still the shape they think of when someone says Vauxhall. There was nothing fancy about it, but that's exactly why it worked. Number 6. The Rover P6. The Rover P6 always carried itself with a bit of quiet confidence. It wasn't the sort of car that made a scene, more like the kind that slipped past you, looking sharp without trying to. When it first appeared in the mid-60s, it felt like something from the future. Clean edges, independent suspension, a cabin that felt more like a cockpit than a car interior. By the 70s, it had become the sensible man's luxury, smart, steady, and built for people who appreciated a proper drive. You'd often see one parked on a neat driveway, someone's pride and joy, half polished and half rusting. The 3500 V8 gave it a bit of muscle too, smooth and unbothered even when pushed. It was the sort of power that didn't need to prove itself. You could feel it without shouting about it. But like a lot of British cars from that era, things behind the scenes weren't as tidy. Factory disputes, corners cut, and management chaos all started to chip away at Rover's reputation. When the P6 finally bowed out, the SD1 took its place, but it never quite captured that same calm assurance. Even now, spotting a P6 feels a bit special. There's something quietly self-assured about it, the kind of elegance that doesn't fade, even after all these years.
Number 7. The Morris Marina. You could always tell when a Marina was coming down the street, not by the sound, but by the way it leaned. There was a sort of reluctant wobble to it, like the car was thinking twice about every corner. It wasn't elegant, and it didn't pretend to be. When British Leyland launched it, they wanted something safe, a car that wouldn't scare accountants or confuse mechanics. So they built one that looked like it had been designed with a ruler and a deadline. Inside, it was plain, practical, and just about roomy enough for a family and their weekly shop. The Marina's biggest problem was timing. The world was changing, front-wheel drive, better handling, modern shapes, and the Marina clung to the old ways. But while the critics rolled their eyes, regular people quietly got on with driving them. They were cheap, easy to fix, and if you ignored the rust, surprisingly sturdy. There's a strange nostalgia for it now. The Marina never aimed high, and that's probably why it's remembered. A symbol of a decade where Britain was trying to modernize, but never quite let go of the past. Even now, spotting a Marina feels a bit special. There's something quietly self-assured about it. The kind of elegance that doesn't fade, even after all these years. Number 8. The Triumph Stag. The Stag looked like something out of a Mediterranean postcard. Low, sleek, a proper bit of glamour for British roads that rarely saw sunshine. When it launched, it felt like we'd finally built a sports car with a touch of class, something to rival the Italians without the price tag or the pretense. People loved how it looked. That roll bar behind the seats gave it an unmistakable shape, and the burble from its V8 had just enough arrogance to turn heads. It wasn't built for speed so much as style, the sort of car you'd imagine parked outside a country hotel with its roof down, even if it was raining. But owning one wasn't all romance. The Stag's V8 had a reputation for overheating, and if you didn't treat it right, it treated you worse. Plenty of them ended their lives on hard shoulders, steam pouring from under the bonnet while their owners swore eternal loyalty to German engineering instead. Still, the Stag has aged well. Maybe because it looked like it was from a better future, one Britain never quite reached. Today, when one glides past, it's impossible not to glance twice. It's that rare car that feels both elegant and tragic at the same time. And somehow, that makes it even more British. Number 9. The Reliant Robin. You couldn't mistake a Reliant Robin for anything else. 3 wheels, fiberglass body, and a sense of optimism that outlasted common sense. It wasn't built for speed or grace, it was built for the bloke who wanted a car but didn't fancy paying road tax. The idea was simple. Make something light enough to count as a motorcycle but still keep out the rain. In theory, it worked. In practice, well, it depended on how fast you took the corner. Tip one over and you'd never live it down. Everyone knew someone who nearly rolled one once, whether they actually had or not. Still, there was a strange charm about it. It was proudly British in that stubborn, make-do sort of way, half genius, half daft. It gave mobility to people who couldn't afford the big stuff, and somehow that made it feel democratic. Over time, it became part of our comedy, thanks to Only Fools and Horses and every pub story that followed. But under the laughter, there's a bit of respect too. Because for all its faults, the Robin did what it promised. It gave thousands of people freedom on a budget. And really, that's nothing to sneer at. Number 10. The Triumph TR7. When the TR7 arrived, it didn't look like anything else on the road. Sharp lines, low nose, pop-up headlights. It could have passed for something out of a sci-fi film. Triumph called it the shape of things to come, and for a moment, it really did feel that way. It was bold, almost too bold for Britain in the mid-70s. The wedge design split opinion right down the middle. Some thought it looked futuristic, others thought it looked broken, but nobody could accuse it of being dull. It was a proper statement car, the kind that made you look twice whether you liked it or not. Underneath, though, the story was rougher. British Leyland was falling apart behind the scenes. Strikes, budget cuts, corner cutting. The TR7 suffered for it. Build quality was hit and miss, reliability even more so. Plenty of them left owners stranded, which didn't help its reputation. And yet, for all the jokes and frustration, there's still affection for it now. The TR7 was brave. It tried to push British design somewhere new at a time when most manufacturers were just trying to stay afloat. When you see one today, that odd wedge of a car sitting low and confident, you can't help but think it didn't quite work, but thank God someone tried. So, which of these forgotten classics would you bring back if you could? The sleek Capri, the stubborn Allegro, or maybe the gloriously wobbly Reliant Robin? Let me know down below. I'm curious which one still has a soft spot in people's hearts. And if this brought back a few memories, give it a like and subscribe for more stories from when British motoring still had personality, even when it leaked a bit of oil.